Welcome to another episode of Image Rights by N. Mashinini. And today I will be picking up where we left off with the conversation on deepfakes. If you haven't listened to those episodes, I would highly recommend that you go back to the previous two episodes about deepfakes. On today's show, however, I have a special guest, Kelsey Farish. Kelsey Farish is a media and technology lawyer at international law firm DAC Beechcroft. Based in their London office, she is one of Europe's leading legal experts on deepfakes and manipulated digital content. Her particular expertise is in disruptive digital media and internet governance. She specializes in copyright, privacy, expression, publicity, and social media laws, and particularly enjoys working with clients in the creative industries and audiovisual sector. She has written extensively on personality rights, social media, and the application of artificial intelligence to the film, television, and advertising industries. It was her interest in internet culture and personality rights which led her to develop a particular expertise in deepfakes and hologram acting. She has advised European legislatures and academics on the merits of proposed deepfake legislation, and her scholarship includes publications in the Journal on Intellectual Property Law and Practice and for the European Audiovisual Observatory. Originally from Seattle on the west coast of the USA, she particularly enjoys understanding how media and technology reach across borders in today's connected world. Thank you so much for coming onto the show, Kelsey. Hi, how are you?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an honor having you here because I've been following your work on deepfakes, and I'm actually one of those people who regularly check your website on deepfakes, which you can tell us all about. But I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you mentioned that you are a deepfakes expert. So I was wondering if we could maybe tell the listeners, what does it mean to be a deepfakes expert?
So I love how you're like fact checking my LinkedIn profile. I think that's really important. I'm glad I didn't say I was a great chef or something like that, because I am not. So when I say that I'm a deepfakes expert, it simply means that, well, first of all, I should say that I'm a legal expert in deepfakes. I have a pretty good understanding of how the technology works, but I wouldn't purport to be a computer programmer or a computer engineer. So I'm not the person behind the scenes generating and coding the deepfakes or their algorithms, but I understand the law, and it's something I've been studying, deepfakes in particular, since they first crashed onto the scene in 2018. And so essentially, just by way of background, I've always been really interested in advertisements and endorsements and celebrity culture, not so much because I was enthralled by the individuals themselves, but I think that society and advertisement really kind of reflect our aspirations and our identity. And it's a way for people to communicate about ambitions and desires and even fears, right? And so I was always really interested in that. And as an IP lawyer, I've just always found the law surrounding images of people really interesting. Now, what happened a couple of years ago was I saw one of the very first deepfakes on Reddit, and I thought, well, this is a bit dodgy.
That's the one also on Reddit.
Indeed. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm sure that there's got to, like, what would happen if I, Kelsey, was shown in a deep fake? How could I get it taken down? And that was really the genesis of my research, was trying to figure out for myself, if I wanted a deep fake removed, or indeed if I had a client who said, Kelsey, someone's made a deep fake out of me, how do I remove it? And that set me on a course studying in my own time and doing a lot of writing and research on publicity laws and privacy laws and social media regulation. And over time, I mean, I guess you could say I was just kind of bored and just writing prolifically, not thinking that anyone would ever read it. And then slowly it started garnering a lot more attention. And I was invited to conferences, asked to write in academic journals. I think it was just a case of being in the right place at the right time, in that I was interested in it and vocal about my interests. And so now, nearly 3 years later, I've been on, podcasts, as you say. I've advised European policymakers on proposed legislation, lots of academics, and lots of lawyers as well.
Interesting. Can you maybe describe for our listeners the most common uses of deepfakes and generally give us a description of what deepfakes are?
Sure. So I'll start with what a deepfake is. It's important to distinguish at the outset that a deepfake is not a shallow fake or a cheap fake. Deepfake comes from deep learning, which is a type of artificial intelligence. A shallow fake or a cheap fake is just some sort of manipulated content. So photoshopping or going in and modifying something like that, right? So the thing that makes the deepfake special really is that application of deep learning or artificial intelligence. And in the same way that humans learn through repetition, so you can imagine learning a new language, you're going to use lots of flashcards. An artificial intelligence algorithm is shown lots of pictures of the human face. And over time, it starts to identify what an ear looks like, what a nose looks like, what a mouth looks like, and so on. And it gets really, really good. I won't go into the technical details on this, but it's called the generative adversarial network. It basically becomes really, really expert at generating, hence generating pictures of the human face. And it moves lightning fast, and it's based on the flashcards, if you will, of pictures of people. So the output of that algorithm, the thing that it generates is the deepfake, which is a piece of audiovisual content that's been manipulated, typically to show someone doing something or saying something that they did not actually do, and to do that in a way that's so realistic that the human eye cannot readily recognize that it's fake.
So, Kelsey, would you need someone's picture to then create a deepfake, or can the AI just create a deepfake out of nowhere?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So you basically have two aspects. You have the background photos that are just trained on all mouths, all eyes, just the human face in general. And then you have a specific image of the target or your victim. Now you would need, let's say hypothetically, you were going to you wanted to create a deep fake that was pornographic in nature. And so you would need the victim's face to then superimpose on top of the background image. And because the artificial intelligence knows, generally speaking, what mouths and eyes and nose looks like, that's how it creates the video. So I should pause here and just say that, typically we're, over the last 20, 30 years, we've become very accustomed to seeing photoshopped and airbrushed images of people. And, when you look in a magazine, we all kind of say, oh, yeah, that's not exactly right. Maybe she looks a bit thinner, or maybe that guy looks more muscular. We've kind of come to accept that still photographs can be manipulated. But what we haven't started to accept is that beyond the cinema screen, that video can be manipulated. Yes. And so that's where the trickery really comes in, right? Is because we just aren't, our human nature is not to question that it could be fake, if that makes sense. I mean, think about court evidence as well. 100 years ago, a witness statement was seen as, the best that you could get. And, over time, the next level up, written statements were replaced by photographic evidence, right? Once cameras became more popular. And then CCTV came around. So now you think, oh, I don't need a witness statement if I have a CCTV camera with evidence of a burglary. But what deepfakes have done is they've really challenged us to think, oh my gosh, what is truth? If everything can be manipulated in a convincing way, how can I trust my own eyes?
Yes. It's interesting. You mentioned in passing earlier that deepfakes can be used for pornographic material. So that would be just one of the uses. But what are the other uses? And also, I think, touch on good uses of deepfake technology.
Sure. And actually, I remember now that you did ask me what are the most common ways in which deepfakes are used. Right now, the vast, overwhelming majority of deepfake uses is for entertainment purposes. And I'm going to include In addition to that entertainment value, I am going to include pornographic content in that, because the viewer is engaging in some sort of entertainment. It may be with or without consent. Of course, if it's sexual in nature and the participant, i.e. the victim, hasn't given their consent, then it's not pornography, it's image-based sexual abuse. But basically, we've heard a lot of things in the media about, the destruction of democracy and voter manipulation and infrastructure crumbling. But the reality is we're not seeing that yet. Even in the 2020 presidential elections, the manipulated content that we saw was more like a shallow fake or a deep fake. So people slowing videos down or speeding them up to make them look funny, but that wasn't a deep fake. It was just your more simple sort of manipulation. So yes, the vast majority is in the entertainment world, in pornography, image-based sexual abuse. But as you rightly say, there are beneficial uses of the deepfake technology. One of those that I find particularly compelling is in the area of Alzheimer's research. So you can imagine an elderly person who has difficulty recalling, or they can't see the person in front of them as their, husband of 50 years, but they can watch a deepfake video, which shows them looking like they did when they were younger. And then suddenly, for a few moments in time, the person with Alzheimer's can watch the video and, they remember, oh, that's my husband. Okay. Another way that deepfake technology is being used is actually in the heritage and culture and history sector, in that museums are using deepfakes to bring people who were the victims of genocides back to life. Back to life in inverted commas, of course. And the reason why they've done this is they found that people who visit museums, when they see photographs of people who were victims of horrible atrocities, they're very moved by it. But taking it up another level by having that person speak their truth, detail the horrors that they've experienced in a moving way. I mean that as in the photographic moving, not necessarily just touching and emotional. It can leave even more of a profound impact. So it's easy to imagine essentially sitting down at a museum and watching someone who's a victim of a crime or an interesting moment in history talk about their experiences, and you could really feel like you were there.
And are there no ethical issues that come up with that? I can imagine people who would take offense in sort of bringing someone back to life, as you mention it. Are there no ethical considerations that have come up there?
There certainly are. In fact, one of the researchers that I spoke with recently is working on a project called Privacy of the Dead. And she and her fellow researchers are looking into, for example, what happens to a Facebook account after a person passes away, like what you can use their photographs for. So that same area of research can certainly be applied to things like hologram acting and deepfakes. You might remember that as kind of a romantic gesture, Kanye West brought back Kim Kardashian's father. People have done the same with Tupac and Whitney Houston. But if we stray into the legal remit here, it's important to remember that, once a person passes away, they no longer really have a right of privacy. It's only in very defined circumstances and in certain jurisdictions that they have a right to privacy. Because I suppose, in a sense, unless it's highly confidential information, once you die, you have no privacy rights to be invaded. But what you could have are personality rights that extend post-mortem. So, for example, California has a very strong post-mortem right, and this is especially for actors, because what would happen is a famous actor who had a lot of footage of them, they pass away, and then the film studio says, oh, let's make a sequel and we'll use the old footage and we'll put them into a new movie. And the children or the heirs of that deceased actor were like, wait a second, we didn't consent to this. You're using my deceased auntie's footage in a way that violates her rights of publicity. Now, those are the legal controls. You asked about the ethical controls. And I would say certainly there are ethical implications, not only for the person depicted, but indeed for the viewer, right? Yes. I know there was a recently there was a study, or not a study, but an experiment where a woman whose 7-year-old daughter sadly passed away. And she was invited, I think it was in Japan, to engage in a virtual reality where she wore a headset and she basically had an afternoon tea with her deceased daughter. And you could imagine that it was extremely emotional for her. But you can see both sides of the coin, can't you? On the one hand, I'm sure it was very moving and important for her to have some closure. But on the other hand, that could be quite a traumatic experience, very traumatic to see a loved one brought back to life.
Yeah, I guess it's a personal thing. And when you mentioned the California postmortem rights, it reminds me that recently I discovered in New York in December 2020, they also came up with a postmortem right of publicity, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's right. And so you have a lot of coastal states with a very strong theater or Hollywood presence. They're really keen on that. A few other states as well, but you'll often see a lot of movement in New York and California first in terms of publicity and privacy as well.
Yeah, interesting. So describe some of the legal approaches aimed at addressing deepfakes that are coming from leading countries such as the USA and the UK.
Sure. So right now, as you can imagine, a huge amount of focus is being on image-based sexual abuse. And I can certainly see why. I mean, it causes extreme distress to the victim. It's easy to conceptualize how it could fall under forms of harassment, online abuse, stalking, that sort of thing. So that's really been the primary target, is trying to figure out how we can attach the law to essentially revenge porn that never happened, right? Because that's what a deepfake is, right? It didn't actually happen. This is where the fine line between expression and creativity comes in. So, a lot of people say, well, no, this isn't, it's not really revenge porn. It's just a fantasy. It's just like fanfic, you can see right away how it
so.
Yeah. Well, I don't think so either, but it's difficult to draw that line between something that is harmful versus something that is just a creative expression, right? I'm trying to think of an example, but sometimes actors and actresses, they participate in scenes in film, and it's sexual, and you could take that content and manipulate it and put it online. Now, you could argue, well, wait a second. No. They did consent to have themselves naked on screen. But the difference is how it's being used, right? If I'm an actress and I say, yes, I'm going to take part in this love scene for this movie, this one movie, that doesn't mean that I'm saying now for forever, I'm always going to be okay with someone using a picture of me naked, right? So it really comes down to how is it specifically being used? And this is a huge issue because it means that for every deepfake that goes out there, you have to pause and think, okay, what's the circumstance? How is it being used? What's the context? What's the bigger picture here? You can't just say all deepfakes are bad.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it's also true for all media that we see on social media, because the context is also distorted sometimes with things that we see on social media. I recently found out about a Deepfakes Report Act in the USA. I suspect it's federal law, but I don't really see much coming out on addressing specific issues rather than just reporting on deepfakes in terms of USA. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So that's a really good point. So the United States is a bit funny in that it has 50, obviously, separate states, but things like copyright law and communications typically fall under the remit of federal law because that's, they're allowed to do that. Yeah. And essentially, if I'm being very blunt and perhaps a bit cynical, it's really difficult to regulate things like communications and freedom of expression without bumping up against the very strong First Amendment free speech rights in the United States.
Yeah.
And remember too, the United States has no inherent right of privacy. There's no fundamental human right in the same way that we have over here in the UK and throughout much of Europe. We have a very strong protection for our corporations as well. And so, if you can imagine your Twitter or your Facebook, you don't want to spend all of your money hiring people to watch and view deepfakes and then remove them, right? You just want to put your content out there, let people do their thing, and then make all the advertising money, right? Like that's what you want. That's an ideal situation. So governments on both sides of the Atlantic really typically are struggling with this question. To what extent should we be regulating deepfakes? Should we live and let live and just let people do what they want unless it causes extreme pain or financial damage, i.e., fraud, image-based sexual abuse, and that all the rest of the stuff, we'll just let people deal with it and figure it out? Or do we take a much more focused approach and outlaw deepfakes, require social media companies to remove them as soon as they pop up? Like how do we move forward and tackle this problem? And it's cultural to a certain extent. And it also depends on, as I'm sure you're very well aware, who holds the power. If you have a government in power that is very pro-business, then you might have a different outcome than, say, someone who has a platform of protecting disenfranchised populations or maybe protecting vulnerable people. So it's really dynamic and really interesting.
Yeah, that's true. And I've also seen a very specific focus on addressing deepfakes in election. So I think maybe, as you say, it depends on who's in power and what their interests are. And so there's a much more focus on trying to control what happens during elections more than any other publication of deepfake. That's what I'm getting from my research. But
I think that's right. And also because if you can imagine, once you're in power, what do you want to do? You want to hold on to that, right? So the last thing you want is to become prime minister or president of a country, and then 6 months, 6 years later, whatever, have someone create a really damaging deepfake about you, and then you lose power. So again, I'm being a bit cynical here. It would make sense to me that pushes towards limiting the extent to which political deepfakes can make their way onto the scene would be very prominent. By way of example, in Texas, they introduced a deepfake law whereby if an individual has intent to manipulate the outcome of an election and creates a deepfake of a politician within a certain period of time before said election, they can be held liable. Now, lots to break down there. How do you find the person who created the deepfake? True. How do you prove intent? It's possible to create a really damaging deepfake about a politician without involving the politician at all. You could create a deepfake that shows the politician's spouse or children, it's really limitless. It's the human imagination that just can go crazy. So again, the law is a language of detail. In order for the law to work, you must be very specific about the things that you are regulating and the reasons why you're regulating them. And right now, there are just so many uncertainties with deepfakes, and there are so many creative applications of it that legislators and lawyers and academics are like, oh gosh, where do we start?
There's a lot of talk going on about using detection tools to get the deepfakes that go online as quick as possible so that we could take them down. Because I've seen that it causes a lot of damage depending on also how long a deepfake is out there being distributed on social media and so forth. So I just wanted to find out from you, do you think that deepfake detection tools are a good approach to ensure that deepfake victims receive some level of protection, particularly on social media? And also considering that AI develops so rapidly. Mm-hmm. So do you think deepfake detection tools are a good step in the right direction?
It's such an interesting point that you bring up. And, you're absolutely right. The AI technologies are developing so quickly and people are so clever and they're I mean, goodness, the rate of development and advancement is just incredible. And I think that because the law, by contrast, has to go through an iterative process where you have lawyers writing the law, and then it goes through policy stages, and then people have to vote on it, and it just takes ages. We are lagging behind in the law, right? And I also think we're lagging behind in public awareness. I don't think that I mean, it's only been recently in the last couple of months, really, that people have started to become more aware of deepfakes, right? I think that because public education is lacking, legal progress is slow. I think that, yes, we need some sort of either top down or bottom up detection methods. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Top down is essentially where Facebook says, every time we see one, we're gonna remove it. It's like a post facto removal. Mm-hmm. Bottom up is the other way around, where there's some sort of blocking mechanism whereby, only certain individuals can use the technology. And then, everyone else, you have to have a special license or a special password, or, things are watermarked, so there are different ways that you can look at blocking them from popping up. But then you have to ask yourself, how do we harmonize that around the world?
Yes.
What if, yes. I don't know the answer to that question.
And also, what is the impact on innovation if you think about licensing and so forth? I think we need to be also careful to not stifle innovation, especially because, as we mentioned earlier, there are good uses for deepfake technology.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because one of my big research projects was actually for the European Audiovisual Observatory. And they are like the legal research institute for Europe's film and television industry. And they were very interested to understand how they can, how their filmmakers can utilize deepfakes and AI for their cinematic ventures. And this is a hugely important artistic and creative venture that so many people need, and it's a phenomenal industry. And if you were just to stand up one day and say, "Yep, deepfakes, hologram acting, no more, we're banning it all," I think that would be a real tragedy. And then secondly, with respect to licensing, I mean, so much of the technology is already out there. It's already been unleashed on the world, that I think that reeling it back, I just don't think that's a workable possibility. So I do think that essentially the social media companies are going to need to have a long think about the role that they want to the role that they want to play in shaping discourse. Because in my view, with a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility. And as we've seen over the last decade or so, social media companies have an incredible amount of power, whether they want it or not, to shape the outcome of really important decision-making processes in society.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And I think as much as we've seen a lot more of this power in election seasons, I think that it trickles into other arenas as well. Especially also in the marketing industry. I mean, it has changed marketing a lot. I see the way in which marketing used to happen when I was still growing up and in secondary school and all of that is very different from what we're seeing now. So they do have a lot of power. And I think because video is also so important in today's world, it is important for us to be having this deepfakes conversation, and on another side to be having this image rights conversation as well, because our likeness, our pictures are out there on social media, and what happens to these pictures and how freedom of expression can either allow people to exploit our likeness is really an important consideration that I think everyone should know, not just the legal minds, but every person in society should understand the boundaries of their image rights. So, Kelsey, in closing, I just wanted you to quickly take us through your last words, maybe a rule of thumb for people who are looking on social media, who want to know, how do I know if I'm looking at a deep fake or something that is real? Maybe a quick tip.
Well, goodness. I mean, I have to admit, I've fallen for a deep fake during
No.
the yes, I have during the presidential election. There was a deep fake of a politician that I do not like, and I saw it on Twitter, and I was like, oh yeah, this is so funny, and so I retweeted it, and then like 5 minutes later, I was like, no way. That I kind of it like sunk in. I was like, wait a second, and then I looked back, and I'm like, yep, that's a deep fake. So I deleted it. But even people like myself who've been studying this for years now, we can still fall for them. So I'll just say in closing, it's important to remember that there are three kind of layers of harm and possibilities, right, with deepfakes, and those really are, you have your financial, you have your business level with things like marketing, advertising, endorsements, things like that. The next level is societal, right? And that considers democracy, truth, freedom of expression, all of those sorts of big values and things that kind of hold a culture and a society together. The third way that deepfakes can threaten society or people in general is the individual level. And that's where the pornographic deepfakes or the really mean deepfakes. And for example, if you're going through a divorce, I've heard of instances where a ex-spouse will create a deepfake purporting to show their ex-partner abusing children.
Wow.
And submitting that to a judge. Yeah. So it's not just sexual. It's not just political. It's very deeply personal. So those three layers: business and marketing and so on, and then you have social and democratic, and then individual. And I would just say that to regulate those things, it's really complex and it's really difficult, right? So just if there's one thing that you take away, it's just kind of to remember it's a complex and dynamic area. And then in terms of just what you can do to protect yourself, it's not reasonable to expect that no one will have photos of themselves online. I mean, goodness, LinkedIn, for example. I mean, I post pictures of myself on LinkedIn. I need to have a LinkedIn profile. I have a profile of myself on my law firm's website, right?
Yeah.
But you can be smart about it. So, for example, my rule of thumb for children in particular, don't take lots of pictures of your baby and then at 5 years old and then 10 years old, because that can actually inform aging algorithms and make them much bigger. And you just don't know what's going to happen. So it's really easy to put a little sticker or a little emoji on top of a baby's face, and protects their privacy as well. And then also you don't need to upload 20,000 pictures of yourself in a bikini. I know it's tempting, but maybe just one or two, because remember, the algorithm gets better the more images that it has to really become sophisticated on. So by all means, share your pictures online, enjoy social media, but just maybe before posting a picture of yourself or someone that you love, maybe just think, do I need to be sharing this? Do I need to be sharing this to so many people? Maybe I can put it behind a filter or a blocked account, for example. There's just lots of different ways that you can be a bit more sophisticated when sharing pictures of yourself online.
That's true. And I've just learned something new today. I mean, I need to check my social media accounts too.
I have certainly used those apps where they like show you what you would have looked like being younger or older. And those are all that algorithm has been trained on pictures of babies and then toddlers and then children. So it's getting that information from somewhere, right? But they're fun. I use those apps sometimes too. And I think to myself, oh no, I'm being a bad lawyer. I should remember but it's hard not to, it's hard to resist, right? I'm just saying, in moderation, do it in moderation. Take the pictures of yourself on your beach holiday, but just remember that if it's posted publicly, someone with bad intentions could use it in a way that you don't consent to. Until we have a robust system whereby offenders can be found easily, unfortunately, the responsibility is going to fall to each of us to kind of ensure that we are protecting our digital legacy and our digital assets.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey. So where can our listeners find you on social media? Maybe your Deepfakes website? Tell us about that quickly.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's pretty easy. It's just Kelsey Farish. That's Kelsey Farish at Twitter or kelseyfarish.com. And then I also have an Instagram account, Kelsey the Media Lawyer. But the main stuff is mostly on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you
so much.
It's been an honor talking to you today, the deepfake expert, Kelsey Farish. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm really pleased that people are finding this interesting.
This podcast series is based on research supported by the National Research Foundation of South Africa, grant number 121887. But the views and opinions expressed in this series do not reflect the views and opinions of the National Research Foundation, its management, or its governance structures. Until next time, control your image rights.